by Professor João Porto Albuquerque from the University of Warwick at the Institute for Global Sustainable Development. João will present his ideas and from his experience with community mapping in several projects that the Institute has been working with. Afterwards we have Nicera. Sorry, Nicera. I'm just Nicera Wanjiru. And Nicera has been a community mapper for over a decade in Kibera, and we'll be very excited to hear her experience as well. So, João, will give the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Philip, for this introduction. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, bom dia, buenos dias. It's really exciting to be here and to be speaking to you about the topic I love so much, which is community mapping. Many thanks, Philip, for the introduction, and Patricia, and Dana for all the organization. It's really great to be speaking today. So I'll share a couple of slides, and my presentation today is really mainly to give a bit of context and to set the scene, if you want, for this series of workshops and collaborations which we really are excited to do together around community mapping. So I have I'm looking at the idea of open map data for community resilience and empowerment, and I would like to look with you what that could mean and what can we do with community mapping. So for this, well, the first question perhaps is to start with some background from where I'm speaking from in terms of what is community mapping and the types of activities we do with community mapping. So starting with this, I would look at the first question: why mapping for resilience? And actually, it's an important question. Perhaps sometimes we just assume, but now I think it has become tragically perhaps current very recently in the work we do in the state of Acre in Brazil, which, you know, some of you may know is going through a very challenging experience at the moment. We have historic flood levels in the state of Acre and 10 different municipalities in the state of Acre, at the same time as the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic and a dengue surge as well. And all of this topped up with a migration crisis in the border with Peru. And this has left about 120,000 homeless in 10 different municipalities across the state of Acre, which is in the north of Brazil. And you know, when we have a situation like this, and you're seeing like compounding what we call really kind of like cascading and systemic risks here associated, it is a very challenging situation. So and questions like who are the most vulnerable and how to help them, how to quantify the impacts and the relief needs, they become central. And I think maps have a big role to play, and open data has a big role to play when looking at this context here. And when we look at this very practical context, resilience, perhaps, you know, talking about resilience has a different meaning, which is really very practical in terms of response and to these big shocks and to restoring life and saving, protecting lives and property, but also to think about how can we improve this so that this doesn't happen in the future. So transformations to a more sustainable, to a different way of dealing with this phenomena. So this is perhaps a bit of context of why talking about mapping and resilience. And I will give a bit of context about myself and my group and how we approach this type of mapping. As Philip said, I'm a professor at the University of Warwick in the UK. And I direct an institute, Global Institute for Global Sustainable Development. I'm, of course, also a Brazilian who has been active in Brazil and in different contexts. And at the moment, we do quite a lot of projects with partners around the world related to community mapping. Wrong direction. Let me pass this slide. So we are really, I would be talking here from this context. So my experience here talking about community mapping and resilience draws on a number of research projects, which I'm only listing here for information and not go through all of them, but just for you to have a glance. We were looking at flood resilience in Brazil, and actually we'll be looking very closely with partners in the National Center for Disaster Monitoring Early Warning, CEMADEM, in Brazil, and with FGV, Fundação Getúlio Vargas, and in a project called Waterproofing Date. And this is very closely related to Acre because one of our field sites is the Rio Branco, the capital of the state of Acre. But we have a number of other projects related also to landslides, healthcare access, and about really the idea of mapping for resilience specifically, or digital mapping for informal settlements, which is the Idea Maps network, which we'll be hearing quite a lot about in the context of the workshop and these online event series. And more recently working in Indonesia as well. So a number of countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And the question we've been perhaps, that goes through like a thread for me, like across these projects is perhaps simple, but perhaps not obvious to answer question, which is, how data production can be an opportunity as much as for empowerment and learning, as well as to achieve high quality geographic data. And you can see in some of this picture the type of approach we do with mapping. We use quite extensively OpenStreetMap, and I know we have a very active chapter of youth mappers, and have as part of this online event series. I'm looking forward to the mapathon later as well. We do this sort of mapping events, mapathons. We did that in several countries here. For example, in the bottom right, you see some partners in Kenya who actually were the community members were actually using a computer for the first time, and also like learning to map their own informal settlements. And also we use paper maps and print them and then digitize them back. And you can see here a number of photos related to that, and citizen science. So this all tackling this question for me about, that is very important in the day of today, how to make open data empowering, and how to make the production of open data and open map data a way of seeing the reality differently, and of transforming the basis for some of these realities, especially in informal settlements and in marginalized communities around the world. So with this, I would like to give you two quick examples from these projects, that there's a lot to draw on and to talk about the experiences, and then conclude with some kind of like thoughts on directions for the future, and perhaps directions for our discussions in this online event and in the series of events as well. So the examples come from a project which is another project called the UBILATAM, which is understanding risks and building enhanced capabilities in Latin American cities. It's a project we are leading in the University of Warwick, working with partners at the British Geological Survey from the UK, but also partners from Brazil, as a strong team from Professor Henrique Kukema, the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, UFRJ, and partners at CPRM and CEMADEM as well. And then working very closely with Colombia and with our partners at the Universidad de Antioquia and Colegio Mayor de Antioquia in Medellin, in Colombia, and with partners in practice in Seattle and Dagret in Medellin as well. So, and then a number of other practitioner partners and very important community partners, community institutions in the popular education sector, like the CBCD, but also at the solidarity financing and solidarity banks, like the E-Dinheiro or E-Money Institute in Brazil. So this is just to say a bit of context. In this project, we've been looking at maps and how to look at enhanced data and work with marginalized communities, and look at how open map data can make a contribution to resilience of those communities. And I'll give you two examples, one in Brazil, in Niterói, in Rio de Janeiro, and the other one in Colombia, which are the two partner countries, and how maps actually have been used or are being used to build resilience. So first, this is some photos we did actually last year when the COVID-19 pandemic kicked in. Of course, as you may be aware, communities, impoverished communities in informal settlements were very severely hit by the pandemic, not only in health terms, but also economically, because, many of them saw very quickly their livelihoods completely disappearing. Many of them work in the informal economy, and they, with the restrictions in mobility, they just kind of like couldn't find any work. So this is some photos of mapping we organized so that we could very quickly identify people who are most need. And actually, this is an action led by the Banco do Preventório, which is a community bank situated in the Morro do Preventório, this community in Niterói. You can see here that we used OpenStreetMap, and on the top, you see the map before we started the actions, and in the bottom you can see the map afterwards. So it was mainly the community was a blank spot with some very sparse elements here, and in the bottom you can see kind of like the houses being built. And actually this map is already outdated because the mapping efforts continued, so there are a lot of more community paths mapped, and a lot of different community assets being mapped at the moment, shops and so on, so that the community understands who were in most need to receive, for example, deliveries of food baskets or cestas básicas, which were organized to counter, the problems of the pandemic. So this is one example in Brazil, and the other one in Colombia, I said I would give, is the mapping in El Pacifico in Medellin, which is a community which in a top hill. And actually, we both communities were chosen when we start the project because they were in areas prone to landslides. But what we didn't know is that actually, like, the worst scenario would happen, and that is what happened, that in Colombia, that actually a very strong kind of like mass movement, which was actually not really only land, but mainly water, what they call a torrential avenue, Avenida Torrencial, which happened very quickly with also very strong rainfall, and also some rocks falling as well. And then with this, actually, there was a total loss of a number of residences of the community. And what we saw happening is that actually, very fortunately, Philip, who is here and introduced this, and community members of El Pacifico had produced this map in OpenStreetMap, which you can see here, really kind of like days before the event happened, really. And the map was used just immediately to locate the most severely impacted houses, and actually to have a basis to negotiate the recovery efforts with the alcaldía, with the mayor of the city of Medellin. So this was, again, like maps being used in practice very quickly, coming from a research to practice and in exchange. So with this, I will finish up really my presentation now. The 10 minutes I had are left or are already gone, but I've just finished up with some two quick slides about thoughts for the future, and what I think could be directions for us to work together. First, one idea that we are developing is to see mapping as a process, not only to produce data, but also to create a different way of seeing the world. And this is inspired by the popular education movement and critical pedagogy of Paulo Freire in Brazil, to see really the creation of data as an opportunity for learning not in a top-down way, that for example, people in schools or universities teach the community members, that is, exactly what Freire was against, this type of the framing education in this way, but actually learning as a mutual learning. So instead of really giving the answers, is a pedagogy of questions, as Freire would call it. So I think data should be seen much more as a way of asking questions than as giving definitive answers, inspired in Paulo Freire. And that means that we have to really be sure that our mapping efforts are grounded in particular realities of the communities we are working with, really. And that is the challenge, how to make this data responsive, and actually how to make the methods we use responsive to the needs of community. And Nicera will talk a little bit more from a really very grassroots perspective that I'm really keen, and I think is very important. And I think it's also important to create spaces of dialogue between different groups, between communities, policymakers, local governments, and so on. And with this, I finish with my very last slide, saying that I think maps it should be seen as we call a transdisciplinary problem space. As we have kind of like the problem of generating high quality data, for example, in OpenStreetMap, having completeness, consistency, and scalability, some of the traditional qualities of what we call spatial data quality, but also we should see this as an opportunity for community development. But what I think is most challenging and interesting is to work at the intersection, really. The data which is at the same time, able to give the spatial quality that can be used, for example, in models, in decision making, and policy, but also helps to develop or is part of a process of empowerment and of learning. And with this, I close my presentation with this last slide, which is also a call to action. I talked about Acre in the beginning. We are starting a mapping action exactly about this to respond to the severe situation in contact with the Secretary of the Environment of Acre. They asked us to map 10 different municipalities, and this is now also set up by Vangelis in the hot tasking manager, and I will now invite everyone to join this mapping effort later and in the coming days, so that we can use maps to build resilience in practice. Thanks all for this. I'll stop here and leave you with the Idea Maps network, which I didn't speak a lot, but we'll speak a lot more in the next events.
Thank you, João. I won't talk too much, and because since we are running slightly late, I'll hand on over straight to Nicera.
Gosh. Hi everyone, my name is Nicera, and due to time, I'm just going to share my slide right away. But I'm Nicera. I live in a big city, and it's a big city with many informal settlements. As you can see in my first slide, that's me, and that is where I live. And we have a very many informal settlements. And as I speak, I'll ask you a question about what you see in this photo, the second photo. And as we go on, I'll be asking you a question of what you see in this diagram. What is speaker was speaking, and when I finish speaking, you now differentiate between community mapping and when we talk about technology and community mapping. So, okay, understanding community mapping. For us as community mappers, we want community to be able to interpret their own issues, and they can do that on a piece of paper and a pen, as you can see this diagram. And it is, yes, difficult, and it can, yes, be very, it may be difficult or not. It depends actually, because as you can see, they are mapping hotspot. They're mapping hotspot in their areas. But now taking this map to the next level, we need some expertise on that. Now they have completed mapping, and now they are explaining these points. They are explaining these points, what happens in each and every area. And they were mapping the GBV hotspot in the area. But now, as I say, this map needs to be taken to the next level. The work doesn't finish here. And the question I'll be asking more and more is data becoming the new currency? Is community mapping becoming the new currency? Is the answer yes or no? Then now, community mapping focus. What should we focus when it comes to community mapping? I get pissed off, and I'm sorry to say this, when organizations come to the ground and they want to map out things that even they don't matter to us at all. Me as a community person, I'm like, now, I know you have money, but wait a minute. This is becoming problematic, because when you map out things that are not like, they don't relate to us, and even when you map, you just go away and you never return the data to us. I'm like, now, what is it that you're doing? Okay, our first agenda is about poor infrastructure. I think it's the main, it is a cross-cutting issue in other countries, apart from the first world countries. Maybe you agree on me on that. Then you have the forced evictions. How do you map these forced evictions? You know, even now, actually, as I speak, we are having like a 28-kilometer road in Kibera. So this means that a lot of peoples will be evicted from their areas. And remember, we don't have a RAP. A RAP is a relocation action plan, whereby when you evict people, it is the RAP says that when you want to evict people, you must relocate them to a safer place. But now that doesn't happen at all. Then the poverty penalty from the government. What do I mean with the poverty penalty? Okay, me as a person, I have to like pay for basic needs much higher than a person who is living in a very posh area. For instance, I have to pay for water like 3 times higher. I have to pay for a toilet, I have to pay for a bedroom, so such kind of things. You're being penalized by the government because you are being poor. Then the pandemic, how to map pandemic, and it is not just about the COVID-19. Remember, in the informal settlement, you have a lot of pandemics, like the floods. We have disasters like cholera, which happens, and then climate change. Most of the time is when people think that climate change is cutting down of trees. But now, when it comes to like informal settlement, is very different to us, because climate change to me is now the relocation, the rural urban migration. The rural urban migration now, it's now becoming so rampant in that we are having now the slum above the slums. I mean, with the poor structure, as poor it is very poorly built, there's another structure on top of me. And remember, there's no like toilets, you don't have like those basic necessities. So this one become even like, it becomes, I don't know how to explain this. Becomes now, in fact, it's evil. Let me say that it's just evil, because now very poor structure, and there's another structure on top of the slum above a slum. And now we are having a lot of climate change issues. We've had stories whereby women are having miscarriage because of industrial emissions in the informal settlements, because most of the industries are in the are in the informal settlement, of which is not good at all. We have issues of children again being affected by climate change. So these are things that we should map. We should map out when it comes to now community mapping. Then we have the GBV. GBV is something that is it's all over the world. Academias, researchers, you should come up with tools that we can be able to map out GBV in all aspects. Then I spoke about eviction. This eviction happened during the COVID time. Remember, we had a lot of restrictions, the government sensation, the curfews, but now they went ahead to evict people, as you can see in this diagram, and thousands of people were evicted. Then it was not just in Nairobi, by the way, even in Nigeria, there were evictions, and these were deadly and brutal during the COVID time. And they happened at the village of Ikenja. The infrastructure, poor infrastructure, pathetic. This is pathetic. And if you look well, in the second photo, you can see some structure, and these are people living there. They are human beings, actually, who are living in these houses. And now it hasn't rained, remember, it hasn't rained well. It was just a small rain, and you can see now how the situation is. So imagine a scenario where now there's a lot of rains. So these people will now like sleep standing, or maybe they have to move they'll have to move to higher grounds. So in the informal settlement, we have two sides of the story. Okay, we have the things that are facing us as people living in the informal settlement. As you can see here, this was a demonstration. I was part of this demonstration. On the other side, you have women who are trying to make ends meet, very active women, and yeah, they are doing what they can to pay their rent, to feed for their children, and so forth and so forth. Then mapping and pandemic. So what did we do as community mappers? We carried out 2 surveys, and that was the needs assessment survey and COVID impact on women and crime. When COVID came, a lot of issues were the government didn't like focus on a lot of issues, and this ranges from the crime, of which you say that crime is only for men. Crime is when you talk of crime, what comes in your mind is just men. But now we forget that even the women are becoming perpetrators of crime, and this was the COVID impact on women and crime was basically touching on women below 30 years, and how crime now is how they are getting into crime because they cannot feed for themselves. So because of COVID, there were a lot of issues that came up. One being crime, GBV, the rise of GBV cases, and these are just 2, but there were so many things that came up. Even the radicalization, even the conflict, violence, and extremism in the informal settlements. And the methodology now, we had the documentation, What I mean with documentation is now the actual capturing of the household photos, taking videos. We had the random walk, the household questionnaires. Then we used the ODK and Kobo Correct. Sorry, I'm going very fast because of time. And then we also worked with the Slum Dwellers International, and this was to track the situation of the COVID-19. Because yes, the government was giving us the results, but now we needed to see how are our communities faring. And as you can see, this was carried out in June 2020, and the reports of cases, the first point talks about the reports of cases isolated to 2 settlements in Nairobi, Korogocho and Mathare. There has been low prevalence of testing. There was low prevalence of testing in Nyarenda and in all the Nairobi informal settlement, because I remember a scenario whereby people were asking now, why are you testing us and we are hungry? Just give us food, and then test us. So people were like very receptive when it came to being tested over COVID. Then there were the reports of deaths. There was the raw number of isolation centers, of which it is still now, but the COVID is now, the numbers are decreasing, which is good. Then the community rapid response, because now I'm mapping, and this is where at times you go wrong. And I'm talking about organizations that are doing mapping, the researchers, the academias. We take the data to their community, because now they need to come up with solutions. They need to come up with some ideas of what should be done after giving them this data. And you can see this was in Mathare, whereby now the community were asking the government to work through community-led organization. Number 2, they were asking the government to use the local youths as community health volunteers. The third point was they were asking the government, and I repeat, they were asking the government to give them continuous flowing water, because now we were being told, wash your hands with soap and water, but there was no water. But we can see now from these, we are having the NMS giving us free water in the informal settlement. And even other organizations now, they came up to like give the community free water. Then condemn violent and corrupt models of enforcement. Evictions during COVID, during pandemics. I don't know if that will ever stop. Maybe if God comes. Then to work with residents and CBOs to locate safe isolation centers. The isolation centers, I think we were having very few isolation centers, and the numbers were escalating. This was in June. So this was after the data collection. This is what the community were demanding from the government. These were the possible isolation centers in ISILI community, and you can see all of them are schools. In fact, all of them are schools. So with when we have, and there's a danger in having an isolation center in a school, because imagine a scenario now whereby, in fact, right now the students are in school, and if we had scenarios whereby now this was to be implemented, and then the students come back to school, and now the COVID-19 would have affected a lot of students in the school. The MOMBASA County as well, most of them are schools. And yeah, we have a few dispensaries. We have the Tononoka Social Hall. At least this one is a bit different. The COVID-19 impact on young girls. What happened? What happened when we had, now the schools were closed, yes. And movement, a sensation of movement. So we had girls being locked up with fathers, with brothers, with all those people, and the numbers of early pregnancies skyrocketed, just like that. We had a lot of cases of early pregnancies, and even as I talk, a lot of girls have not gone back to school because of COVID. And that's why I was saying, the COVID-19 brought a lot of things that government were overlooking, and it's until the situation went out of hand, that's when they started acting. The gender-based violence, I talk about this. I'm a survivor, but when it came to COVID and gender-based violence, the cases skyrocketed, and we had poor, and this was because we were rocking the vulnerable people. This is our women, young girls, with the perpetrators. And remember, I'm talking about a 10 by 10 house with like 3 to 5 members. And these people are not working because there were a lot of job losses. And now the gender-based violence was ranging from femicide. We had a lot of young girls, young men who were killed during that time. The cases were not reported, but we have captured that in our data. Again, we had a lot of rape cases. We had a lot of things that were happening around the gender-based violence. This was simply because perpetrators being locked down with vulnerable women and the vice versa. And when I talk about GBV, it is not just about women. Even the men are being violated, but they never say when that happens. The challenges of community mapping, and you'll agree with me, when it comes to community mapping, we have communication barriers. We have the literacy levels, because now we are talking about people who are in university. We have now the stakeholders. We have now the real community that you're supposed to involve in this data collection. The lack of funding, the language when it comes to interpretation of this data. And of course, we are facing that as well in community mappers. Because now, after collecting this data, taking it to the next level, now the language, how do you interpret that data? Because in fact, I was in the interior parts of Rikoni, and they're doing the same thing that you're doing, the community mapping, but now you find that the language and the literacy levels, the language and the communication barriers makes it a bit different when it comes to training those people, but we are working on that as well. Then I'd ask you a question, what is the role of researchers? What do you think that researchers and academians should do when it comes to community mapping? Because again, this is, to me, this is the new currency. Data is the new currency, and especially community mapping, because with data, you can be able to lobby for services from the government and the county government. Because for us, we have the two systems of government, the county government and the national government. With data, you can be able to look for resources because you have the facts. You're not talking from the point of, we have a problem of infrastructure. We have a problem of unemployment. You have the data, so you can negotiate with that data. And when you have resources, that is money. So this is my final slide. And as I said, my name is Nicera Wanjiru. I'm the founder, the Community Mappers. That's our website. Any question, I'm here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicera, for this really thought-inspiring and amazing, this deep insight was really fascinating. So maybe this brings us to a close of the first session. Actually, I would also like to mention that this webinar was actually supposed to be hosted by Patricia, who's really organized all of this. So, but there were some technical difficulties. So I hope that Patricia will be able to join us. Maybe for the next workshop, or for sure for the next workshop, she might be able to join us. So then our next, so now I think we switch over to to the next to the first workshop. It's with Willie Marcel, who will introduce us to the OpenStreet. Well, Willie Marcel from the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. He's in the technical team, and he will also introduce us to the online OpenStreetMap editor. And then there will be a mapathon with the with youth mappers from UFIPA. So if you now have a look at your email, you might have received a link to the next workshops. Yeah, thank you very much, and see you in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.